Chapter 23. Kelin poked the cloth of the tent. It wasn't the heavy canvas he was used to. Instead, it felt light and slick to the touch, nor was it covered with a layer of wax on the outside to prevent the rains from seeping inside. He hadn't bothered studying their shelter before, having been too busy worrying about everything else. Currently, it was the most interesting thing he had. This was better than last time, he reminded himself, because he wasn't being tortured. Now all he did was sit in the dark and imagine terrible things. Dare had her back to him and was staring out at the endless rain on the other side of the tent. Fallon sat between them. The cloth flap moved on its own. Kelin backed away from it. A blonde elf stuck his head in and entered. He smiled, a little tiredly. "I don't know what to say, except that this is the last place I expected you to be." Caleb slid inside and collapsed down to his knees. Kelin and Dare stared. The elf wiped an eye and gasped, "But I'm so thankful you're here. Caleb!" Dare lunged forward and tried to tackle and hug him at the same time. He embraced Dare briefly, but tightly. "I thought you were dead. Both of you." She smirked. "We managed." Beside her, Kelin paled and gulped. Fallon reached up and patted his shoulder. Caleb's voice cracked. "I should have never abandoned you. It's my fault." "Stop," she interrupted. "We made it through." "Did we?" Kelin growled. Caleb dropped his chin. "I hope so." "I was more worried about you," Dare said, as she glanced at Kelin in confusion. The elf nodded, still staring at the ground. "Thank you." His gaze rose to the child. "And you must be Fallon. Well met." The boy scooted behind Kelin and peered around him at Caleb. The elf's voice wavered, but only a little. "I've heard much about you, and I am glad to see that you are just a child." Fallon shook his head from near Kelin's back. Dare rounded on the prince. "Where have you been?" His smile dipped. "Thanks to you, I escaped." Kelin grunted. "Yeah, thanks to us. We wouldn't have been tortured if you hadn't... Kelin!" Dare gasped. Caleb slouched and squeezed his hands together. "I regret what happened to you, Kelin, with all my heart." His eyes darkened as he stared into the distance. He pulled his knees to his chest. "You don't know how badly I was losing the battle to myself. And then I found you." Kelin snorted. "But I ran away again, convinced I'd left you to die." Dare pushed herself in front of Kelin. "What happened to you? And we didn't know you were royalty." "I had no idea you were nobility, Lady Saxen." Dare tensed, but Caleb shook his head and said, "I escaped in second to Akron and soon joined with others. After that, my party met with those who have kept you prisoner. We're going to Riverfall Haven, but it's treacherous to gain entrance from where we are now." He looked up, but his face remained somber. "I'm grateful to make this final push with friends." "Are we still friends?" Kelin's voice echoed off the canvas walls. "You didn't warn us. You didn't even try to rescue us either. They crushed my teeth." "Kelin!" Dare snapped. Caleb pressed his lips together and bowed his head. His tone dropped. "We replaced your teeth. I have been informed about what happened with you." Kelin folded his arms. "Now you sound like a real elf." "So? We are still friends." Dare narrowed her gaze at him. "Or we were tortured for nothing." He didn't back down from her glare. "Stop it!" Fallon sniffed and crawled out from behind Kelin. "We're all hurting." They stared at him. Caleb forced a tight smile. "He's right. We've all suffered, and it's not a contest." He looked at the child. I lost my mother too, Thalin. The boy looked toward the prince.
Do you cry?
Caleb nodded. Yes, I do. Do you? Thalin gazed up at him, studying the prince's face. Finally, he bobbed his head. Kelin shivered. I am still angry. Caleb bowed his head. It was never my intention to abandon you to such a fate. I should have held hope for your survival and done something to ensure it. For that, I am sorry. All right. It's not you I'm angry with anyway. Kelin breathed out and loosened his shoulders, but his expression remained tensed. Caleb smiled, although it didn't reach his eyes. Thalin hunched down and didn't look up.
My dad has something to tell you. It's important.
Caleb leaned away from the boy. Do you know what it is? He shook his head.
Mama said we had to find you. She said we need to find Prince Eddie.
Dare snapped her fingers. Right, it was Ed something. Eidolon, Derora, the elf replied. She shrugged. Kelin snorted. I don't even know what to call you. Your Highness, your Grace, your Majesty. The prince reddened. Caleb is sufficient. I'm not wishing to advertise my presence, and I haven't earned my actual name. His face brightened. Besides, Kelin, I believe that you are the odd one here. You're the only one in this tent who doesn't have elven ancestry. Kelin blinked. I am the only real human here, aren't I?
I am human.
Dare cupped her hands over her ears.
This is so little that it doesn't mean anything. It sure didn't help at our trial.
Caleb shook his head. No, it had an impact with the judges. Not Farallon, Kelin muttered. She broke his nose, Kelin. But that was after the trial, she protested. And I'm not sure they've treated me better for it. It means more than I think you can appreciate. The Duke thought you were a pot elf willingly helping a Kemen. I was. She crossed her arms. The good one. Caleb scowled. You don't
My dad is good,
Thalin shouted. Caleb stiffened, but he said, I certainly pray it is so. Dare looked up. So, Caleb, you're going to let us go, right? No more being prisoners? He shook his head. I can't. The Knight Captain would have to do that. Oh. She deflated. Sir Jacob probably won't. Kelin said, He and the cook are about the only ones who have given us a chance. Amthros too, Dare added. Caleb nodded. Makes sense. I think the lady and Jacob are the ones who have had the most contact with humans. Especially Sir Jacob. Most of Sylvadown is human these days, I believe. Oh, I knew that, Dare blurted. Because they're a dragoon army. I mean, I should have known that. After a moment, Kelin asked, Did Thistle have a trial too? Caleb's face tightened. Not exactly. He was brought before a tribunal. However, before formal proceedings could begin, he swore on Carinth and Atome. What? Kelin burst. Dare shrugged. Makes sense. It was common among humans, too, to swear on a god the person didn't follow. The oath obliged the god to punish the person if he lied, and the god wouldn't necessarily be favorable to the person because he wasn't a follower. Caleb whispered, But can you understand what that means to us to hear a Kemen do that? Kelin asked, Isn't it the same? Caleb shook his head. Then he said, Well, I suppose it is. We never expected him to know it was something he could do. Dare cocked her head. So what information did Thistle have? Only that there is an elven traitor. Caleb sighed. The tribunal, well, you can guess the good Duke's opinion. But because Thistle surrendered to Sylvadown, they could do nothing without the Knight Captain's consent. Sir Jacob spared his life, for now. But if he doesn't name someone... He looked away. Thalin looked up with tears shining in his eyes. The prince's face remained stern. We'll be on the river within the hour. These are dangerous rapids, but you're in skilled hands. You know, Kelin mused, we've never been on a river before. Not like this. The corner of Caleb's mouth inched up. Then learn to paddle quickly. The tent flap rustled again, and an elven guard poked his head inside. Excuse me, Your Highness, you're needed by the water. Of course. Caleb backed toward the entrance. You don't know how much it means to me that you survived, even though I did not have a hand in it. Farewell. And he was gone. Fallon shivered and grabbed one of the blankets. Kelin helped him to get it around his shoulders. The temperature was barely treading above freezing. Dare listened to the rain and the sounds of the camp beyond. Snatches of conversation were audible, but she didn't understand anything over the roar of the river. She pushed the tent flap open wider. Let's get something to eat. We're not supposed to leave, Kelin said. She shrugged. We're allowed until someone stops us. Now come on. I'm hungry. Around the camp, the rainfall passed with only a few drops trailing behind. The clouds broke apart, and the moon peeked through. A small party edged close to the raging waters. Thistle stood to meet them from where he had been sitting, surrounded by guards on 3 sides and the river on the 4th. This is the end. Caleb's eyes glinted in a splinter of moonlight. Unless you give us a name. Thistle met the prince's gaze. Palming the recovered knife, he studied the faces of Jacob and Amthros. Amthros snorted. We cannot trust him, no matter what he says. The storm reader stared at him. The knight was less than a foot away and within easy striking distance of the hidden knife. Thistle cleared his throat. The Kelin would not do anything as gross as write it by hand, but from what I've deduced, it's your Duke Farallon. He betrayed your king and queen. Amthros gasped in surprise, while Caleb and Jacob fought to keep their expressions neutral. Thistle continued, as smooth as a knife trailing through water. He should be here. But where is he? Where is his duchess? I witnessed a small party leave on the river. I assumed to advise whoever is ahead in Riverfall of your arrival. But would the Duke himself need to go? His obligation is to you. You're lying, the prince hissed, retreating a step. These attacks began with the king and queen, and no enemy should have had access to them. Someone close to them aided the Kelin. Jacob's face remained as stone. It makes sense. I have to grant you that. But so do the best lies. I don't believe you. Caleb was shaking his head. The Duke would never... He helped my mother and father found this kingdom. Amthros growled beneath his breath, but said nothing. Thistle swung his hand in front of himself and raised an eyebrow, keeping the knife hidden. The prince sighed. I will not act against one of my own on the word of my enemy. Thistle bowed his head. As your majesty pleases. Caleb took another step back to take all of them into his view, including the silent guards. This is in our confidence. Speak of it to no one. He looked straight at Thistle. I will respect Sir Jacob's choice to spare your life. And I suspect you may be withholding something more. I am. But the weight of my message has already fallen into your hands. Thistle remained unmoving. I understand, Sir Prince. Jacob nodded and then frowned. The knight captain glanced around, and his scowl darkened. It's quiet. That river is anything but quiet, Amthros replied. Ignoring that, it's quiet. Is anything wrong, Sir Knight? Caleb asked. The massive elf shrugged. I don't know. I'm going to check on the sentries. You should prepare to depart.